Good morning. The title of the sermon is The Golden Rule, or Jesus was really into ergonomics, and we should be as well. The biggest personal cost to our last move 3 years ago from Granite Bay to Elk Grove was that I could not locate my favorite screwdriver. Still haven't found out where it is. Now you may say, a screwdriver? What's the big deal? However, this was no ordinary screwdriver. This screwdriver looked like this. In fact, exactly like this. The screwdriver has a ball handle. It's also a ratchet. You can get the ball in the palm of your hand and just swivel it back and forth and put that screw into a piece of wood. It is fast. It allows for a lot of torque or force, and it is incredibly easy and comfortable to use. The good news is I found one on eBay this week, and I bought it. $22.06. I indulged myself and made the purchase. It's set to arrive on the 29th of October. Otherwise, I'd probably be showing it to you right now. And for me to pay $22.06 for a screwdriver, you know this must be pretty darn special. Right before the pandemic, I did a sermon on ergonomics. Ergonomics focuses on efficiency and effectiveness, really on practicality. The definition of ergonomics is the study of people's efficiency in their working environment. So I would argue that a lot of religion is not very ergonomic. Often when people criticize organized religion, what they are really criticizing is not actually the teachings that make up the faith. No, often they will say that the teachings are really, really wonderful and beautiful and powerful. No, the criticism is that somehow those teachings don't translate into our lives, and those lives don't seem to really resemble Jesus. Just last week, my friend Eric in Greece, and we talked by Skype or Messenger, which is free, a few times a week, was telling me about meeting a student of his from the late 1990s. Eric taught English in a small Greek village of Nafplion, where he's living right now. He said that as a teenager, this student had little respect for organized religion in the village. Now, the main organized religion in Greece is the Greek Orthodox Church. Well, this last week, Eric had dinner with this student, who's now in his 30s, and discovered that this person continues not to be a part of the Orthodox Church, the Greek Orthodox Church. However, very clearly and very intentionally and very fervently and passionately, he orders his life around the teachings and the values of Jesus. The golden rule, loving neighbor as oneself, working for justice and peace. So this person's frustration with Christianity wasn't the Jesus part. It was the poor ergonomics of the church built on the teachings of Jesus. This person believed that the church failed to effectively and efficiently produce faithful lives. Guess what? Jesus voiced almost the same concern with the religion of his day. Matthew 23, verses 27 and 28 says, Jesus is criticizing the failure of the religious institutions to produce faithfulness, and he says, "You Pharisees and teachers of the law are in for trouble. You're nothing but show-offs. You're like tombs that have been whitewashed. On the outside, they are beautiful, but inside, they are full of dead bones and filth. That's what you are like. Outside, you have the appearance of goodness, but inside, you are evil and only pretend to be good." So if the religious institution had poor ergonomics, poor effectiveness in producing faithfulness, What was Jesus' correction? Yeah. Well, we've actually been dealing with it for the last 3 weeks now. Jesus cuts through the ineffectiveness through doing two things and repeating them again and again, over and over, these two things throughout the Gospels. First, Jesus made the golden rule the core operating principle of the faith in his Sermon on the Mount. In Matthew 7:12, Jesus says, "In everything, do to others as you would have them do to you." Now, this was based on Leviticus 19:18, just a slight rewording of that. And then Jesus said, "For this represents the law, the Torah, and the prophets," which is essentially saying that this gets at the heart of all of Scripture. That was the first thing he did. The second thing Jesus does is he couples the golden rule with the prayer that every Jew prayed twice a day, at sunrise and at sundown, the Shema, which went like this: The Lord our God is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and with all your strength. And Jesus took that and then added to the Shema essentially the golden rule, saying, and the second is to love your neighbor in the same way as you love yourself. And then finally, Jesus concluded by saying, all the law and all the prophets hang on these two commandments, the same thing he said as with the golden rule. But for Jesus, this wasn't just a one-and-done teaching for him. This was his round, red-balled screwdriver, his go-to tool in the toolbox. He picks it up again and again, and subsequently his disciples would do the same thing. So the golden rule appears in Matthew 7:12 and also in Luke 6:31. And then 3 times Jesus presents his particular version of the Shema prayer, loving God and loving neighbor, including the golden rule part, in Mark 12, in Matthew 22, and finally again in Luke 10, right before he tells the parable of the Good Samaritan. Now, usually the fourth gospel is seen as being much more focused on our relationship with God and less about our relationship with others. And yet, in John 13, Jesus says this: you must love each other just as I have loved you. And then again in John 14, the next chapter, Jesus says, if anyone loves me, they will obey my commandment to love others. And then again, and perhaps most forcefully and beautifully, in the 15th chapter, the next one, Jesus said, this is my commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you. No one has greater love than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends. So not only in the 3 Gospels that focus a bit more on our human relationships do you find the golden rule, but also in the Gospel of John that focuses especially on our relationship with God, you still find the essence of that connection with God lived out in the same golden rule. But it doesn't end there. It extends to the rest of the New Testament. In the 2nd chapter of the book of Acts, which describes the early church, you find that same golden rule being lived out. It says, all the believers were together and had everything in common. They sold their property and possessions to give to anyone who was in need. And then the Apostle Paul, author of a quarter of the New Testament, writes in Galatians 5:14, for the entire law is fulfilled in keeping this one commandment: love your neighbor as yourself. And then in 1 John, the letter, not the Gospel of John, in the 4th chapter, these words: love one another, because love comes from God. Everyone who loves is born of God and knows God. Whoever does not love does not know God, for God is love. So what is pretty clear is this: Jesus placed the golden rule at the center of what it's all about, and then repeats this again and again and again throughout the Gospels. The early church took that golden rule and made it the core organizing principle for what it meant to follow Jesus. And this was not just something to believe in, this was something to believe in and also to live out. It is even bigger than that. The Golden Rule represents not only the essence of Christianity, but it's the essence of Judaism. And Christianity is very much a branch of Judaism, right? And then in the 6th century, it becomes the core ethic of Islam. Their statement is, repel evil with what is good. In fact, you find the Golden Rule present in Hinduism, Buddhism, Taoism, Jainism, Zoroastrianism, and pretty universally in pretty much all Native American forms of spirituality, as we discovered in our Bible study last Wednesday on the Disney movie Brother Bear. Yet it's not just the fact that it is found in all these faith traditions. It goes back to ergonomics. The Golden Rule for many human beings, and that includes us, at least most of the time, really is that round, ball-handled screwdriver in the toolbox of our faith. It is the go-to, at least when we get it right. Sometimes we grab the hammer and pound our neighbor, don't we? Yet if we are honest, we realize that Jesus is constantly saying, check out that cool, round ball handle, which fits perfectly into your hand. That Golden Rule tool is the one that I recommend 99.9% of the time. Norman Rockwell, for 47 years, was the chief illustrator for the Saturday Evening Post. From 1916 to 1963, when he retired at the age of 69, Norman Rockwell painted 323 Saturday Evening Post covers. His work is often described as classic Americana, often very sentimental and nostalgic. He became known as the best illustrator in the world, bar none. Yet in 1960, he started working on what would become his most famous and influential Saturday Evening Post cover. And it was based upon the core organizing principle of his life and what he learned from traveling the world. It is known as Norman Rockwell's The Golden Rule. If you type 4 words into any search engine, you will find this picture coming up. The Saturday Evening Post cover from April 1st, 1961. You see, 5 months after he started it, Norman Rockwell's Golden Rule painting was on the cover of the Saturday Evening Post. Yet actually the image went back to 1953 when he started what was intended to be a mural that was entitled The United Nations, but which he could never finish because he lost confidence in his ability to capture the essence of the UN. It just wasn't that clear to him. Yet in 1960, as the nation and the world found itself in the midst of incredible racial strife, especially here in the United States, and on the brink of nuclear annihilation with the Soviet Union, the Golden Rule became that clear organizing principle that emerged for Norman Rockwell. He described it in this way in 1961 as his Golden Rule cover appeared. Most of the time I try to entertain with my Saturday Evening Post covers, but once in a while I get an uncontrollable urge to say something serious. Like everyone else, I'm concerned about the world situation. And like everyone else, I'd like to contribute something to help. The only way I can help is through my pictures. So for a long time, I've been trying to think about a subject that might be of some help. Then one day it came to me. I suddenly got an idea. The Golden Rule, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. That was the subject I was looking for. Looking back at that moment, I'm not entirely sure why or how that idea got into my head. But I guess if I think about it, throughout my life, having traveled the world, everywhere I went, people were so welcoming to me and my family that warmth and hospitality always stuck with me. And it reflected how I wanted to treat everyone in return. In my own personal research, I've been reading up on comparative religions. The thing that all major religions have is the golden rule. They share that in common. Not always the same words, but the same meaning. Initially, I made all sorts of sketches. It wasn't easy visualizing an abstract concept like the golden rule. And then I remembered that mural for the United Nations that I never finished. Now I knew where to begin with what I began 7 years ago and never found the way to bring it all together. It would soon become not only Rockwell's most famous Saturday Evening Post cover, it would become clear as Rockwell's core operating principle and his contribution to the world. In 1985, 6 years after his death, Rockwell's The Golden Rule in glass mosaic form was presented by Nancy Reagan at the United Nations. It is the most viewed piece of art in the United Nations headquarters. It stands 10 feet tall and 8 feet wide and weighs a half a ton. It's made out of small pieces of glass or glass tiles. In 2014, the mosaic version was rededicated, and in honor of that, the original was brought to the United Nations for a period of a couple of years. In 1915, Pope Francis made his first trip to the United States and also made his first speech at the United Nations. Pope Francis wanted to spend time not only with Rockwell's mosaic version, but especially with the original painting. There's a picture of Pope Francis with the head of the UN there posing in front of it, but really it wasn't the posing that was the most important. Pope Francis stood in front of it and looked at the picture deeply for a long period of time. He was struck by the way Rockwell depicted all the races and cultures of the world, 28 persons all together, behind the gold leaf words that read, "Do unto others as you would have them do unto you." Yet following that moment, standing before Rockwell's The Golden Rule, as the Pope stood there gazing at words that he knew were Jesus' core operating principle, he realized he was staring at Jesus' toolbox, the one with the perfect shaped handle, which had become Rockwell's core operating principle and favorite tool as well. And that seemed to happen for Pope Francis as well. In the following days, as he addressed the United Nations and the U.S. Congress, the Golden Rule was presented as the core principle and tool for us to live by, both individually and collectively. He said, "Let us remember the Golden Rule. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Let us seek for others the same possibilities which we seek for ourselves. Let us help others to grow as we would like to be helped ourselves. If we want security, let us give security. If we want life, let us give life. If we want opportunities, let us provide opportunities. The yardstick we use for others will be the yardstick which time will use for us." The Golden Rule reminds us of our responsibility to protect and defend human life in every way possible. And since then, with respect to issues of war and peace, economic justice, discrimination based on ethnicity, gender and sexual orientation, with respect to abortion and the end-of-life care, Pope Francis again and again and again lifts up the Golden Rule as the core operating principle as followers of Jesus. This last week, it was revealed to the world that Pope Francis affirmed that the Catholic Church should recognize same-sex unions. This is something that he's been telegraphing for the last 5 years. As you know, this is a huge issue in the church today. I have been reading everything I can to discover the basis for his epic change. Little has been formally shared. However, I suspect that at its core, we will find, without a doubt, do unto others as you would have others do unto you. In the 1990s, WWJD emerged as a powerful ergonomic handle for the Christian faith. WWJD, what would Jesus do? I was amazed by the power of that tool. It became the center of Sunday school, Shasta Camp, Vacation Bible School, and countless sermons for the next 2 or 3 years. Unfortunately, WWJD became a victim of its own popularity, so used and eventually so overused that it was replaced by something newer and fresher. And yet, as a parent, I can tell you that it was the most powerful tool for our 4 children in terms of what life and faith is all about. And all 4 grabbed hold of it. It became the core question that they would ask in situations of trying to figure out, what are we supposed to do? What would Jesus do? Now, I'm convinced that the reason that question became so powerful is directly related to the tool that it is really built upon. Treat others the way I want to be treated. In other words, when you think about what to do, stop. Take a moment to step back and turn it around. If someone else was making that decision, and that decision affected you directly, what would you hope? What would you want for them to do to you? So WWJD produced clear and compelling guidance because the golden rule is such a powerful tool, such a compelling tool. And according to Jesus, the way of ordering your life that will keep you in alignment with all the commandments and all the writings of the prophets, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Amos, and all the others, nothing else fits into the palm of our hand and the palm of our lives so well. Nothing allows us to make sense of what faith and life are all about. You see, Jesus was really into ergonomics, and we should be as well. Amen.